So if you've always wanted to photograph deep space, things like nebulas and galaxies, but you weren't really sure where to start, then this video is for you. What's up? My name's Ian. I used to work in the telescope industry for a long time, putting together imaging systems for places like NASA, JPL, MIT, but I've also helped thousands of photographers take their first photos of deep space. And before I did any of that, I was just like you, trying to figure out how to do any of this stuff. So I'm gonna take all of my years of experience in teaching this stuff and give you a no BS roadmap to getting your first photos of deep space. So let's get right into it. I'm gonna talk about this stuff in 5 different stages. And we're gonna start all the way here from the gear you need. And we're gonna end with stuff that, might be a little bit more advanced, but it'll give you an idea of how to get even better photos as you get into astrophotography. This first stage I wanna talk about is the gear you need to do this type of photography. And I want you to keep this in mind. You wanna start simple and you wanna use what you have. So what is the gear you need to do this? You need your camera, you need a lens, and you need a mount. And that's it. That's all you need to start capturing deep space. I guess you need a tripod too. So I guess technically it's 4 things, but you get what I'm saying. Okay, so it's 4 things, right? Camera, lens, mount, and then obviously a tripod to put this stuff on. Let's start on the camera. What kind of camera do you need? Well, you want a DSLR or a mirrorless style camera. So Sony, Nikon, Fujifilm, Canon, doesn't matter. If you have one of these, you're good to go. If not, just buy a used one. You don't need brand new stuff. One of my workshop students was using a camera from 2012. She showed up with a Nikon D3200. And guess what? She still got amazing photos of the Andromeda Galaxy. So moral of the story is you don't need the latest and greatest gear. All right, so what about lenses? What kind of lenses do we need to do this? Now, first, I wanna say that a lot of people think you need a telescope to do deep space photography, but you don't. And a lot of times using a telescope can actually make things more complicated. And remember, we want to start simple. So a lot of people already have lenses with their camera setup. So just use the lens that you have. I took a photo of the Andromeda Galaxy using a Fujifilm 55 to 200 millimeter zoom lens. Is it the most expensive lens in the world? No. Was I still able to capture deep space? Yes. So the point is just use what you have. So what focal length do you want for your lens? Well, honestly, anywhere between 150 to 400 millimeters is a sweet spot. This is good for deep space photography. Now, you don't need to follow this to the T, like it doesn't have to be exact. And another thing that's really important is the F ratio. So as long as your lens can go can I write? No, f4.5 or lower. So you want to be f4.5 or lower. If your lens can do this, you can shoot deep space. That's totally fine. And again, like I said, you don't have to be exact here with this stuff. You want to start simple. I mean, one of the best lenses for deep space on the market is a really inexpensive lens. It's called the Rokinon 135 millimeter lens. It's an f2, and there have been some amazing photos that people have taken using that simple setup. So again, start simple, use what you got. Let's move on to the next piece of equipment I want to talk about, which is the mount, or a lot of people call it the star tracker. It's one of these things right here. So I've got the Skywatcher Star Adventurer Pro here. I use it for Milky Way photography, but I also use it for deep space photography. So what is this thing? This is the thing that lets you track the stars. So the stars move across the sky. And so when you take long exposures, they're going to streak. But if you use a star tracker or a mount, it lets your camera and lens setup follow the stars as they move across the sky. When I was in the industry, we would have people always asking us, what is the most important piece of equipment when it comes to deep space photography? And we told them there's 3 things. Number 1 is the mount. Number 2 is the mount. You could probably already guess what number 3 is. It's the mount. Yeah, so that's how important this piece of equipment is, because without that, you're not photographing deep space. Now, there's a couple of considerations that you need to know about when it comes to mounts. First is the weight capacity. So there are some star trackers out there that are specifically for Milky Way photography, like the Move, Shoot, Move and things like that. Those are for lightweight setups, your camera and a small lens. Do I have one here? All right, yeah. So things like a Move, Shoot, Move with the like really low weight capacities, it's for something like this. You have your camera and you have a wide angle lens, so you can do Milky Way photography. Those are not really suited for deep space. You want something like the Star Adventure I was showing you here. And that's it. So you've got your camera, whatever you have, a Fuji, Nikon. You've got your lens. Let's say you got the Rokinon 135, the GOAT, or maybe like a 55 to 200 zoom, or maybe you got a 200 millimeter prime. Great, whatever. And then you've got your star tracker, and then it all just goes on a tripod. And let me show you what that actually looks like right here. This is going to be your deep space imaging setup. Camera, lens, or this is a telescope. I have the Red Cat 51. You don't have to use it, but if you do want to get a telescope, I highly recommend something that's like really lightweight, like one of these, and then your star tracker all on a tripod. And this is your deep space photography setup. This is what you're going to be using to capture deep space. It's really simple and straightforward. Once you have the star tracker and all of this stuff, what do you actually do when you're out there shooting? How do you determine what to shoot? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in the next step. Okay, this next stage is all about preparation because capturing deep space requires a little bit of planning before you actually go out and shoot. So we're going to talk about where you shoot deep space, when to shoot deep space, and what it is you're going to be shooting. So where do we shoot deep space? Well, you shoot deep space. You shoot deep space from dark skies. So if you don't know what dark skies are, it's essentially places where you can see tons of stars in the sky. If you've ever been to somewhere like Atlanta or LA and you look up, you can't see any stars in the sky. That's not a dark sky spot. That's a heavily light polluted city. And the city lights block your view of the stars. So you can't capture deep space. So you're going to have to travel. This is a non-negotiable. And think of it like if you want to shoot landscapes, like let's say you want to shoot the mountains, you're going to have to travel to places where you can photograph mountains. So where do you find a place near you? You can go online. There's a place like lightpollutionmap.info, great website, or just Google light pollution map. And you can see where your local dark sky is near you. Now, I have a full guide on how to do that in my Fast Track to Deep Space Photography workbook. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description and it'll show you exactly where you can find a dark sky near you. Okay, so the next thing, when do I shoot deep space? Well, at night. There you go. This is a stupid joke. When to shoot deep space, there's actually some logic behind this. So you want to plan around the new moon. Why do you want to do that? Well, the full moon, it's big and beautiful, but it's also bright. It's a huge source of natural light pollution. If you look up at the night sky when the full moon is out, you can barely see any stars, even if you're in a dark sky spot. You want to shoot when it's on or around the new moon phase, essentially when the moon isn't up in the sky. So let's move on to what to shoot. What kind of deep space objects can I shoot? You want to go after those big, bright, very popular targets. So let me tell you a story. When I was just starting out with deep space photography, I took the time to travel to dark skies. I waited for new moon and I picked a pretty obscure object that I wanted to shoot. It was a galaxy and I saw a Hubble photo and I was like, oh, I want to photograph that. And when I took the photo, here's my field of view, and it looked like that. It was terrible. So don't fall into that trap. Start simple. Go after big, bright objects. What's a big, bright object? Well, the Andromeda Galaxy, for example, is a great starting point. It'll look like this in your field of view. It'll take up way more than just some tiny little dot in your camera screen. So M31, and the M that's just a catalog number, the Messier 31 object. That's the Andromeda Galaxy. That's a good one to start with. Another one is M42, the ever popular Orion Nebula, another great one to get started with. And another cool one, you could do M45. That's the Pleiades, another really cool object. Other ones include like Rho Ophiuchi. That's a really, really cool one that you can shoot, especially if you're in really dark skies. But just look up popular targets, and those are the ones that you're going to want to go after. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that these targets aren't up year-round. They're seasonal. And that's kind of the cool thing about astrophotography. You kind of have to shoot during the right time. It's like, if you want to capture snow-capped mountains, you got to wait for the right time. So how do you know when you can shoot these? Like, when are these actually visible? Well, you got two ways. Number one is you use a website like telescopius.com. You enter the location that you're going to be shooting from. You enter the date which you're going to be shooting from, and then you can see when it's going to be visible from that location. Or you can use a planetarium app like Sky Safari or Stellarium or something like that, and you can just punch in one of the names of these objects and then see where in the sky it'll be up when it gets dark. And one last thing I want to talk about when it comes to shooting objects is how high up in the sky is it gonna be? If something's super low on the horizon, you're not really gonna get a good photo. There's too much atmosphere in the way. So a good rule of thumb is you want the object to be greater than 30 degrees. That was terrible. Let me write that somewhere else. You want these objects to be above 30 degrees from the horizon. So if it's only going to rise to, let's say, 15 degrees, don't bother shooting it. Like, look, you can shoot it. Don't let me stop you. This is just a good rule of thumb. You'll get sharper photos, you get better photos if it's higher than 30 degrees. And you want it to be above this 30 degree mark for a long period of time because we're going to be taking lots and lots of photos. So you know exactly where you're going to shoot, when you're going to shoot, and you know what object you want to shoot. So now we get to the fun part, actually going out and taking the shots. So when you're there, like, what the heck do you actually do? What are the steps? Well, I've broken it down here, so let's start from the top. So the first thing you got to do is this step, which is called polar aligning your star tracker or your mount. So let me grab it here. The way your star tracker works is it has to be aligned to a specific point in the sky in order for it to work. And once you have that alignment, it'll follow the stars precisely. But you have to do this alignment in a pretty precise way. So the way this works is there's a little lens back here with a dial and markers, and you just look through there and you put the pole star up here in the northern hemisphere as the northern star in that exact spot. And then you're polar aligned. When you first do it, it could be a little confusing, but I'm telling you, it's like riding a bike. You do it a few times and then you're off running, no problem. I had a workshop client who purchased a star tracker, tried to polar align, couldn't figure it out. And so they didn't use their star tracker for months because they thought that step was just too confusing, too much. Well, after one night of the workshop with me, she was able to polar align in less than 5 minutes. After 2 nights of the workshop, she was able to polar align in less than 3 minutes. So I'm telling you, you just gotta do this step. And the more precise your polar alignment is, the better your tracking will be. And the better your tracking will be, the longer your exposures can be. And with deep space photography, longer exposures is always better. Okay, so once you've polar aligned, do your best to not knock it out of polar alignment. You don't want to kick the tripod or be too rough with your equipment when you're polar aligned because you'll knock it out of alignment and you'll have to do it again. And if you do knock it out of alignment, it's not the end of the world. I've kicked the tripods more times than I can count. So it happens to the best of us. And if you do that, just repolar align. It's not that bad. And plus it's extra practice. So, don't worry about it. Great. So now the next step is, well, I was going to say finding the target, but I want to talk about focus real quick. Because actually this is something I've seen come up a couple times. So let's, I guess we'll call this like 1.5, right? Focus. So once you polar align, you're gonna, here's your setup here. Once you're polar aligned and you're all good. Now, let's say you wanna get focused, because if you can't see anything, you can't move on to these next steps here. So literally all you do is find the brightest star in the sky. Find, even if it's a planet, who cares, right? Just something that's really, really bright up in the sky. And you're going to point your system there, right? You're going to move it, boom, okay. I'm pointed at, Vega or Capella or something. And you're going to have to focus. So how do you know if you're in focus? Well, if your stars look like this in your live view, you're out of focus. If your stars look like little dots, right? You're in focus. So that's it. You do whatever you can to go from this, where they're all big blobs, down to this, tiny little dots. Okay, so you're polar aligned and you're focused. Now you got to find the target. So if you're not an observational astronomer, you might have a hard time finding where things are in the sky. So what do? Well, you do this. You get your handy dandy app. You go to, let's say, Stellarium or Sky Safari, and you type in M42. And there it is. So here's what you do. I call it the gun sighting method. So let's say it's over here. So I unlock my clutches, right? And I get the phone here and I kind of point to where it kind of is. It says it's right there. Then I lock the clutches down. Wrong way. There we go. And now I think I'm on it. So here's the key. Here is the key. You want to take test shots because these things are so dim that they're not going to show up in your viewfinder. They're not going to show up in your live view. There are some cameras that have like starlight view or like a brightness monitoring or whatever, and you can probably see them, but I'm going to assume most of you don't have that option. So you're not going to know if you're on it. You have to take some test shots to see if you're actually pointing at, let's say, Orion Nebula. So what do? First, get your f-stop as low as possible, right? So let's say you can go to f4.5 is the best. So get your f-stop as low as possible. Now, I want you to crank your ISO way up. I'm talking like 6400, something like that. Crank that ISO up. And I want you to drop your shutter speed to 5 seconds. Because the point is, we just want to see if we're on it. We don't care about the image quality or anything like that. We're just trying to see it. I don't even know if you can see what I wrote. There you go. That might help. All right. So I want you to go, f4.5 or faster, right? F2, whatever your lens can do, faster is better. Crank that ISO 6400, 3200, something really high, and drop the shutter speed, 3-5 seconds, something like that. Then you take your test shot, boop, and then you look, is it in there? If it's in there, perfect. Make your minor adjustments to frame it up exactly how you want. If it's not in there, well, then just make a little bit bigger adjustments of, where you think it might be. Maybe move it just a tiny bit this way, a tiny bit in the declination. Take another test shot. Is it in there? And you just keep repeating that process, right? So just shoot, reorient yourself, shoot, move, shoot until you see it in there. And then you frame it up and get it in the orientation you want in your camera lens setup. All right, so you're polar aligned, you haven't knocked it out of alignment. You found your target, so you're on it, it's centered, framed up, perfect. What do you do now? Well, you got to do test shots. So here's the big idea I want you to keep in your head. You want to go for as long as possible without getting significant star trails. What do I mean by that? Well, first, let me tell you the settings that you should start with, and then we'll go into that. So for settings, for your test shots, I want you to keep your ISO between 6400 and 800. So lock that in, don't change that. I want you to, keep your f-stop obviously as wide as possible. But then I want you to set your shutter speed to 30 seconds. That's our starting point, 30 seconds. These are the settings that you're gonna start with. Now, our goal, right, is to hit 1 minute exposures or 60 seconds. If you can get to 60 seconds without seeing significant star trailing, you're set. You can shoot deep space and you're going to get amazing results. Our stretch goal is 120 seconds, 2 minutes. If you can do 2 minutes without getting those significant star trails, even better. But even if you can't get to 120, just try to get to 60 first. So what's the plan? What do we do? Set your ISO, set your shutter speed, go ahead, make sure your star tracker's turned on, and take your first test shot. When your first 30-second image comes in, you're going to see one of two things. You're either going to see nice, beautiful round stars and your object that you're shooting. If you got this, crank it up to 1 minute. Go ahead and go for that 1 minute exposure. Totally fine. But then there's the alternative, right? You might see what we call star trailing, where your stars don't look nice and round. They're actually streaking. That's what we're trying to avoid. So if you take your 30-second shot, you got nice pinpoint stars, go to 1 minute and try again. If you're seeing this trailing and all these streaky stars, you're going to want to try and repolar align, because this is telling you that your polar alignment is not precise enough. And 30 seconds, while you can still get photos, if you're seeing significant star trailing at 30 seconds, you got to go back to repolar align. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It happens all the time. I've gotten to this stage and sometimes I forget to tighten a tripod leg. And so my whole thing just gets out of whack. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? And then I realize that, oh, I'm out of polar alignment. And then I just go back and start over again. Nothing wrong with that. It's good practice. It's good practice. You're out there under dark skies trying to do this stuff. No problem. It's okay. You don't need to fret if that happens. One thing though to check is to make sure your tracker's on, right? You got to make sure it's on, because I have also done that. I ran out of batteries and then didn't realize it until, after repolar aligning about 4 times. And then I was like, oh, the tracker's dead. So don't be like me. So, okay, if you're out of polar alignment, go ahead, repolar align and just keep trying until you can get nice pinpoint stars at 30 seconds. So what happens next? Well, if you get there, then you go to the next stage, which is increasing it to 60 seconds. So if you increase it to 60 seconds and you see this again, where you got nice pinpoint stars and your object in there and it's nice and sharp, hey, try and go for 2 minutes. And if you can't, don't worry about it. You can do 60 seconds. That's totally fine. But try for 2 minutes. If it doesn't work, 60 seconds. But if you get to the 1 minute and then you start to see a tiny bit of like little streaks when you zoom all the way in and pixel peep, this is where I think you have to make a decision. Now, for me, if I see these tiny little streaks, it's not perfect, I'm okay with that. Remember when I said that you want to go for as long as you can without significant star trailing. So if you're zoomed out and you can't tell, I think it's fine. If you zoom in and pixel peep and you start to see a little bit of trailing, right? A little bit of trailing, that's fine. Like, don't worry about that as long as it looks good as a whole, because again, the whole point here is just to practice, get shots, get results. Now, if you see the big streaks, then yeah, maybe you got to go back and polar line. But if you see tiny streaks, or if you're here at 60 seconds, you're good. Now, if you get to 2 minutes, you're golden. That's the stretch goal. But if you can get to only 1 minute, nothing wrong with that. You're going to be taking great photos of deep space. So now that you've got your exposure time down, let's now adjust your ISO. Let's say we've got a 60-second exposure. We're good there. And we were shooting with, let's say we started with ISO 800, right? Well, this is where you want to look at your histogram because you don't want to blow out the image. So how do you know what a good histogram looks like for this stuff? Well, if you pull up the histogram on your camera, you want your histogram to be about 1/3 from the left. So if everything looks good, it should look like this. And then you get, the stars and the whites here. But your histogram should look like that. So if your histogram looks like that or anything close to that, your ISO is good. Now, if your histogram looks like this, right, that's too high. Your ISO is way too high. So you need to drop the ISO. If your histogram looks like this, it's too dark, right? Well, then you need to crank up the ISO, right? So this is that, and this is that. This looks like a football player's playbook or something. But anyways, that's the point, is you want your histogram to be here, 1/3 from the left of the screen, and then you adjust your ISO depending on where your histogram graph is. Once you dialed it in, you go ahead and fire away. You set up your interval timer or your intervalometer, and you take as many photos as possible. We want to get as many photos as possible, and we want to get, yeah, we want to get as many photos as possible. That's all I'm trying to say. So take as many photos as you can. If you can take 50 photos, awesome. If you can take 80 photos, amazing. If you can take 500 photos, well, I pray that your computer can handle that. But if your computer can't handle that many photos and process them, then, be my guest. But there is a point of diminishing returns, which we'll talk about really briefly in the next section. But the point is, you want to get as many photos as possible. Awesome. So now that we've got tons of photos of M42 or Andromeda or whatever, we got to go to the final step, which is the calibration step. This is the step that will take your astro photos from mediocre to incredible, even with mediocre equipment. So let's talk about calibration. Like I said, this is the step that so many people don't do, and you have to do it. As my friend Brayfall said, if he catches you not taking these calibration frames, he's going to find you and force you to do it. You can do this while you're at home. That's totally fine. Like if you're out traveling and it's late at night, it's 3 a.m. and you're done shooting, you're wrapping up and you want to do these later, that's fine. But there's some crucial things you need to keep in mind. So let's talk about them briefly. So first of all, what are calibration frames and what do they do? So when you take photos, you have lots of noise and dust and stuff on your camera lens, and your sensor gets hot and stuff like that because you're taking long exposures, and it makes your images look noisy and disgusting. So calibration frames cleans up your images, and I'm telling you, it does an incredible job, especially if you're shooting with digital cameras. So let's talk about the first one. First one is bias frames. Bias just cleans up any noise transfer that comes up within inherent in your camera. Dark frames, that corrects for inherent thermal noise from taking long exposures, and flat frames corrects for any optical imperfections, which you will have. I guarantee you will have. You can't get away from this one, and this one is a must. So how do you do them? Bias frames are very, very easy. So all you have to do is throw your lens cap on when you're done. Make sure there's no light coming into your camera sensor. Drop your shutter speed to the shortest exposure possible. Shortest exposure possible that your camera will allow. And keep your ISO the same as what you were shooting Andromeda or M42 with. And then just take, 20. Take 20 shots like that. And that's your bias frames. And we'll use these when we process the image. Dark frames, how do you do that? So your shutter speed should be the same. Your ISO should be the same. And again, you want to have the lens cap on, make sure there's no light getting into the sensor. And you're going to take 20 of those. This one will probably take a little while, so you can do this on your drive back home or, when you wake up in the morning or whatever. Next one, flat frames. So this one takes a little bit more finesse. These two are very, very easy to do. This one takes a little bit of work and effort. I guarantee you, though, the effort is worth it. If you don't do calibration frames, it's like running a marathon and stopping just before the finish line. Like you did all of that work. Why stop now? You got to finish the job, right? You got to finish. And this is what separates good astrophotographers from great ones. So flat frames, how do you do this? Essentially what I do is I take my camera and lens or telescope, and I take a laptop. I put a white frame up on my laptop, and I put a piece of paper in between my lens and my camera so it diffuses the light. Now, the trick is to, again, have your histogram, around 1/3 from the left. In order to do that, what you want to do is just keep your ISO the same, but change your shutter speed to where it'll put the histogram about 1/3 from the left of the graph. Again, you just fire away and take 20 of these. And that's it. Now, there are other methods for taking flat frames. They have ones called like the white t-shirt method. They have flat panels and things like that. But to me, because I don't know, this is just the way I do it. And one really important thing about flat frames that you have to understand is this. If you're doing this after you go out shooting, you can't adjust the orientation of your camera lens setup until you take the flat frames. What does that mean? What you don't want to do until after you take your flat frames is change this part, the orientation of the camera to the telescope. Because if there's a little dust mote here on the lens, and then you do this, it just changed position in the camera. So when you take your flat frames, it's going to ruin it. So keep that in mind. Just keep the orientation the same. By the way, if you want to get all this info in one place, I've got my deep space photography workbook where I talk about everything we just went over and more to help you get on the fast track to deep space photography. So check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. All right, so you've gone out, you've captured photos of a deep space target, you've done your calibration frames. What is next? Well, we got to take all that stuff we did and put it on the computer so we can let the magic happen. This is where the image comes to life. Before we go into the software part, there's a key concept that I want to talk about that'll make all the stuff we've talked about make sense. And it's called signal to noise ratio. So what is this? Well, signal, call it S, is the good stuff. That is light coming from our target. So let's say the Orion Nebula and all of the nebulosity. That signal, that stuff that we want to capture. Well, what about noise? What's noise? Noise is the bad stuff. It's all the things that interfere with our ability to see the good stuff. So that's stuff like light pollution, read noise in your sensor, or thermal buildup. So what does this have to do with what we're talking about? Well, I don't want to go super deep into this. This could be a whole video in of itself, but there's a concept that I want you to walk away with. We want to make our SNR, the signal to noise ratio, as good as possible. Now, this is a number you can actually calculate. We're not going to go into that. But one thing you need to know is that noise is a function of the square root of the signal. So what the heck does that mean? Why does that even matter? So if you plot out a logarithmic graph, or not logarithmic, sorry. If you plot out a square root graph, it looks like this. So this is your number of exposures, and this is your signal to noise. The more photos you take, the better your signal to noise is. And the better your signal to noise is, the better image you get, the better detail you get on the target you're trying to shoot. So let's say you take one photo. Well, your signal to noise is going to be 1:1. So it's going to be not great. It's going to be really noisy, grainy, not looking good. But if you take 9 photos, right? Let's say you take 9 photos here, your signal to noise ratio just increased significantly. You just went from a 1:1 to a 3:1 ratio. Now, the numbers don't really matter. What really matters is this graph here, but that's just telling you that you're doing really well. So the more photos you get, right, the better your image will be. So 10 photos versus 100 photos, right? Look at that jump. Look at that jump between these two. That's a huge leap in signal to noise ratio. But there is a point of diminishing returns. So if you, let's say, go from 100 to 200 exposures, so let's say this is 100 here and this is 200, this difference isn't a lot, right? Like, that's not a lot here. So the point is that you want to take lots of photos, but you don't want to take so many that you're just, frying your computer as it tries to process these. There's a sweet spot. So between 50 and 100 exposures is really, really good if you can get there. And if you can't, just take as many as you can. Now, this will also be affected by how long your exposures are, which is going to look very similar. So the longer your images are, right? So if you want to do a similar graph, it'll kind of look like this. So the longer your images are, the better. So like a 30-second image is going to be a bazillion times better than a 1-second image, but a 15-minute image is only going to be marginally better than a 30-minute image. So just keep that in mind. You want long exposures and you want more exposures. That's all I want you to keep in mind when it comes to this stuff. All right, great. So we talked about lists. Let's go back into the rest of what I wanted to talk about, which is the processing part, bringing the image to life. All right, you've got your images of deep space and your calibration frames. You've moved them to your computer. Now we move on to processing. We do everything from here on out on the computer. So here's the big picture. Here's the big idea I want you to keep in mind. Just follow a simple tutorial. Don't get bogged down by all of the details and all of the excess information. When you're learning to cook a new recipe, you follow that recipe to a T. Like you literally do every single step exactly how it tells you to do it. As you get better, as you learn how to do this, then you can start to change some of the ingredients here that you might think be better. Maybe you cook for a little bit longer, whatever, right? The key is to start simple and just learn how to use the software first by following a tutorial. And then once you start to learn all of the different intricacies of it, then you can branch out and start to adjust things based on your own creative path. There's two very, very popular software that people use. One is paid, it's called PixInsight. And then there's another one, it's free, and this is the one I recommend you use. It's called Cyril. So you're gonna download Cyril, and it works on Mac and PC. So you're good with whatever you use. Now, I'm not going to go through the step-by-step of how to process images. I have a video that I've done. I'll leave a link in the description below that just does a very, very simple, basic, this is how you take your images and bring them to life. But what I will talk about is the high level, like what is actually happening here, so you can get an understanding of what's happening here. Anyways. So this is all going to be automated for you. That's the beautiful part. That's why you did all the work up front. So the automation can be really easy for you. What's going to happen is you have your calibration frames, right? So your flats, darks, biases that you took. You have what's called your light frames. That's what they call it in software. These are the images of the object you took. So Andromeda, Pleiades. Your calibration frames are going to apply to all your light frames, and it's going to calibrate them and clean them up. And you'll have a whole bunch of calibrated light frames. And then the software is going to pick one of these calibrated light frames as a reference frame. It's going to look at that star field, and it's going to take all of these calibrated light frames that you have and star align them, basically line up all the stars, because, images might drift over time and you need things to be exact. So now you're going to have star aligned calibrated light frames. So now they're all lined up together, and then the software will take all of these images and stack them together to give you your final master stacked image. And this is what all of our work has brought us to. This is what we work for. This is what we want. We want this single image. So everything we've done up to this point is to get us to this one image of whatever, Andromeda or whatever you took. But you're not quite done. There's still a couple things you need to do. You need to color calibrate it, and then you're going to do some like noise reduction stuff or stretching and brightening and saturation. But again, those are all super easy steps that I have in my video. Now you have your first ever deep space astrophoto. Congratulations. How cool is that? This moment is so exciting. Now it's time to move on to the next step, which is to keep doing this. Keep getting more photos. You can do photos of the same object. You can get new photos of other objects, but just keep getting out there and practicing. But there's going to be a moment where you run into a wall. You're going to start feeling the limitations of your equipment. And so this is the last section I want to talk about, which is upgrading your equipment. So there are 3 levels that we'll talk about here. Now, I always recommend with level 1 is to invest in the thing that's going to allow you to do this hobby for a long time. And that is the mount. Because as we said, the 3 most important things of astrophotography are the mount, the mount, the mount. So you can have a $10,000 camera, a $5,000 lens, but if your mount sucks, you're not getting good shots. So with mounts, just look at upgrading mounts that can carry the weight capacity that you're looking to do. So if you get something big, like I have what's called an Ioptron CEM70 mount, that can hold up to 70 pounds. Do I have 70 pounds of equipment? No, but it gives me the option in case I want to get a big telescope to go ahead and do that, because I won't be limited by the mount. So usually I'll recommend people get a mount first. And typically you have to get computer controlled software with these. If you use ZWO, then you can use their ASI Air, which is done on the phone. And that's usually a good route too. So look at ZWO, look at Ioptron. These are great companies to get your first mount upgrade from. Great. So what's level 2? Level 2 is the lens and the camera. So this is where I would recommend people start upgrading to telescopes. So your lens might be limiting you because they're not made for astrophotography. Telescopes are made for astrophotography, specifically astrophotography telescopes. And there's a bazillion routes you can go down. You can get SCTs, RCs, you can get IDKs, CDKs, IPAs, NBCs, ABCs. Dude, there's a whole bunch of acronyms of telescopes that you can go for. But the ones I recommend you look at are going to be dependent on what you're interested in photographing. So let's say you got a nice heavy duty mount, you can handle some big payloads like 40 pounds or something like that. So if you want to shoot galaxies, let's say galaxies are more exciting to you. Galaxies are small. Most of them are small. So they require long focal length. So I would recommend a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, like a Celestron Edge HD, or a Newtonian telescope. And remember, you want ones that are specific to astrophotography. And this, I'm not going to go deep into each of these because, again, this could be a whole nother super long video, but this is just something to consider. SCTs, Newtonians, you could also get Ritchie-Chrétien telescopes, Chrétien, I don't remember how to pronounce it, but whatever. But these tend to be a bit more work. If you like to tinker, then this is fine. But if you want to keep things kind of straightforward and simple, usually an SCT or Newt are good options. If you want to shoot nebula, then I recommend you get a refractor. Or you get a Newtonian. You might be seeing a trend here, the Newtonian. Even though I don't shoot with one, it's like a wonderful telescope to upgrade towards. You could also get what's called a Rowe-Ackermann Schmidt astrograph or a RASA. That's another option you could take a look at. All good stuff to try and do some research on. But the most important thing is you want to upgrade your lens. You no longer want to use a lens because it's limiting you, because it has a limited aperture. And with photography, deep space photography, bigger aperture lets more light in. And these are specialized for photographing deep space, where lenses, a lot of the aberrations and things that come about with these, it's not suited for deep space photography. These are. Okay, so what next? With level 2, let's talk about cameras. Cameras, if you're still using your DSLR, perfectly fine. You can continue to use your DSLR, but you might realize that you want to do longer exposures. Maybe 2 minutes isn't enough. Maybe 5 minutes is too much for your DSLR and the thermal noise is crazy. You want a dedicated cooled astronomy camera because they have a cooler on it. It'll keep the sensor temperature cool, which will reduce tons of noise. And again, these are specialized for astrophotography. Now, keep in mind, all this stuff we're talking about here, except for the telescopes, like I said, camera and the mount, you need software to control them. So you'll need a computer or something like the ASI Air add-on, which will let you control this stuff from your phone. So just real quick touching on cameras, there's 2 options. You have color and you have monochrome. Color cameras are basically like your DSLR. It's got a color filter in front, one-shot color. Your image is in color once it comes in, and easy to use. Monochrome cameras, you actually need filters, more expensive, but your signal to noise ratio goes way up, so you get better detail, but you just have to choose individual filters. So if you want a color image, you shoot Andromeda with a red, green, and blue filter, and then you use software to combine them. All right, level 3. This is focusers and guiders. So again, I'm not doing a deep dive in this stuff. I just want to put it on your radar. These are solutions to problems that you're running into. Okay, autofocuser. What does the autofocuser do? Super high level. The autofocuser automates your focus. There you go, done. No, it actually does a lot of cool things. And I think this is like this is like a godsend. This is such a savior when it comes to deep space photography. So not only will it automate your focus when you're out, trying to dial stuff in, it'll mathematically find what the best focus point is and then actually move the focuser there and get you in focus. It will also, over time, analyze the images that are coming in. And then if it notices that the stars are getting out of focus, it will interrupt your imaging session and refocus for you automatically, and then resume your imaging session after it finds that focus point again. So amazing, amazing, amazing piece of equipment. Okay, next thing is the guider. This is the thing that allows you to do really long exposures, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 hour, whatever, hour-long exposures. Don't do hour-long exposures. You don't need to do that. 10 minutes is a good exposure time to do. So essentially, this is a little camera. So this is your amazing drawing of a telescope, right? And here's your camera or whatever. It's actually another camera right here that goes onto another tiny little lens that sits on top of your main telescope and camera setup. And essentially what it does is, using software, it looks at stars as you're tracking the stars. If it notices these stars start to drift a few pixels, it's going to send a command to the mount saying, hey, go back. You're doing something wrong. So essentially what it does is it corrects for any imperfections in the manufacturing of the tracking mount, because nothing's perfect. Even those like $8,000 mounts, they can't track perfectly all the time. So this just is like a nice little safety blanket to ensure that your tracking is good. Because again, if your tracking sucks and you do a 10-minute exposure, you just wasted a 10-minute shot, and you don't want that happening, especially with time being precious. All right, and that's it. We're done. So this is like a new format for me doing this. I just wanted to try something new because it's fun to try things, right? So if you liked this, leave a comment below, or if you have any questions, if there's things I can help you with your deep space photography, leave a comment below. I'll do my best to answer as many of them as I can. Deep Space Photography Workbook, link in the description below. Check it out. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.